Now, the world's oceans have experienced higher temperatures since the beginning of this year. The average temperature of oceans across the globe is the highest on record, which in turn, it's turning out to be a potential threat for, of course, the Earth's climate, marine life and coastal communities. The month of July witnessed the highest global sea surface temperatures, with the surface getting warmer by almost 1 degree Celsius. This, according to the United States National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Sea surfaces were 0.07 degrees Celsius warmer than in June, which was the previous all-time record high anomaly. Sea surface temperatures were above average across much of the northern, central and western Pacific, the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. Data from the NOAA shows a general upward trend of sea surface temperatures since 1901, which have accelerated from the 1970s onwards. The record high temperatures are also putting corals at risk. Just like the reefs off the coast of Florida and the Gulf of Alat, reef in the Red Sea, they are now facing a severe threat of bleaching due to marine heat waves. The extensive bleaching is extensively affecting the marine species, making them extremely sick, shrinking their habitats. Oceans play a vital role as a buffer against the climate crisis by absorbing planet-heating pollution. But the process gets slower in warmer water. This means more carbon is left in the atmosphere, fueling global warming. Some scientists are concerned that the ocean temperature record set this year could mark the start of an alarming trend for ocean heat. Now, for more on this, George Jacob, who is the president and CEO of Bay.org, joins us from San Francisco. Now, the oceans are heating up at an unprecedented rate. Scientists say that it could have severe consequences like drastic changes in global weather patterns. What's your take on this?
It is true that the oceans are heating up, and there are three primary reasons why oceans heat up. One is the currents in the ocean. The second is how the wind transmits the heating up of the oceans. And the third is the insulation level of our planet, which is directly related to greenhouse gases. So the more the oceans heat up, the consequences are the polar ice caps melt, and sea level rise, of course, is a direct result of that. But there are a number of other factors that contribute to heating up the oceans.
Now, there is no denying that climate change is real. It's upending our lives. But do you think enough is being done to mitigate the crisis? I'm talking about the role of wealthy nations and big corporations.
So, it is established that about 50% of the GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions that we see today, has been generated by the 23 wealthy nations. And the wealthy nations owe the developing nations over $192 trillion in terms of climate debt. And that is a mountainous number that is very hard to mitigate. And each climate summit that is organized by the United Nations tries to grapple with that inequity. There is a lot of work that needs to be done even to meet the 30 by 30 by 2030 targets that the UN has set for itself and is struggling to meet, because there are only 6-7 years left in the 2030 timeframe. But to set ambitious goals is part of the strategy to spur up change, intrinsic change, whether it's in policy, whether it's in regulation, whether it's a set of fines that one can impose, and whether it is innovation to address carbon sequestration.
Now, what could be done to safeguard our oceans, which, besides other benefits, also generates most of the oxygen that we breathe?
So, because of the enormity of, the oceans that cover this planet, and because of how little we know about the oceans, the challenges are complex. They're interconnected, and the consciousness of the general public and policymakers has been steadily improving in the last several decades, and that has resulted in path-breaking regulations and monitoring of the oceans, whether it's pollution, whether it's plastics, whether it's sea level rise, whether it's acidification, whether it's microplastics. There is a conscious effort to, curb some of these tendencies of the Anthropocene to pollute everything that surrounds us. And the oceans are equally vulnerable. They don't have a voice of their own. But the signs are ominous, and the signs are everywhere. Whether it's coral bleaching, depletion of fishing stocks, the movement of marine mammals, whether it's a sound pollution in the oceans, and now the specter of deep sea lead mining. These are all challenges directly tied to the human greed to consume and rape and pillage all our natural resources. So oversight, regulations, international treaties, they're all trying to mitigate something that is exponentially hard to mitigate in the beginning.
Right. Could you also share a little bit about your keynote address at the G20 gathering and how the forum should be at the forefront of combating the climate crisis?
And there were people from 26 countries who attended the G20 Climate Track. And the common consensus was that while climate issues are raised in conferences, symposiums, fireside chats, keynote addresses, but outside the parentheses of these conferences, the general public is still largely unaware of what the climate crisis is and whether or not the data and the numbers that they're seeing in the media, is it greenwashed or is it the actual data? So with that sort of sense of lack of understanding, it is more and more important that climate literacy becomes a part of mainstream dialogue. And one of the ways to mitigate this gap between the scientific community and the general public is the creation of climate literacy centers, or what we're calling climate museums. So part of my work is focused on creation of many such institutions in other parts of the world, including San Francisco, where my home base is, to allow for general public to understand what the climate crisis is, to drive home points of solution, whether it's policy, whether it's change of personal habits, whether it's innovation to sequester carbon, and whether it's a combination of all of them. And then also have a clear understanding of what is the price of inaction. What is the cost that would accrue cumulatively if we don't act today? What is the price that our next generations will pay down the line? Without being an alarmist, there are methods of understanding what human ingenuity can do in terms of addressing this crisis, and making sure that we nurture hope spots, making sure that we focus on marine protected areas, making sure that we change our personal habits of overconsumption, recycling, et cetera, a combination of all of those factors will eventually turn the tide, hopefully.